They handed her a broken knife, bent, useless, a joke meant to humiliate. But in the frozen heart of Alaska, that flawed blade became the instrument of survival. What you're about to hear isn't just a story of endurance. It's the story of a woman who turned weakness into strength and silence into command. Stay with me, because once you start this journey, you won't want to stop. And if you enjoy it, don't forget to follow. There are more stories like this waiting for you. The knife didn't fall so much as it thunked. An ugly, final sound on the hangar's concrete floor. Its tip was curled like a fishhook, the edge nicked to a gray, chewed line. 20 heads turned. A couple of privates smirked. Someone coughed into a sleeve to hide a laugh. The overhead heaters rattled, puffing out air that smelled faintly of diesel and cold metal. Elena Markova looked at the knife the way you might study a puzzle piece from the wrong box. Then she lifted her eyes to Sergeant Kruger. Kruger had the manner of a man who'd never once lost an argument with gravity. Square shoulders, frost-burned cheeks, a jaw like a closed fist. A dozen deployment ribbons flashed dull under the sodium lights. He wore authority with the same ease other men wore a watch. And right now he was amused. "Last one in the crate warrant," he said, letting the title scrape. "Make it work." Elena didn't reach for the knife. Not yet. She stood motionless at the head of a short, lean row of rucksacks, boots lined neat and parallel. A slight woman in a regulation fleece and an old-issue field jacket whose cuffs had been restitched by hand. No flourish. No patches beyond the minimum. Her hair was pulled back without vanity. Her eyes were steady and dark, taking in Kruger, the crate, the pitted knife. Behind him, Fort Ravenwood stretched out in winter geometry. Quonset huts, radar dishes, the sawtooth line of the Chugach foothills etched in white and slate. A gust bullied the hangar doors. The metal answered with a muffled boom. On a far wall, a map board showed their course area speckled with grease pencil X's. The letters SEER, survival, evasion, resistance, escape, were chalked above it in a practical, merciless hand. Colonel Walker stood off to the side, arms folded. He had the expression of a headmaster forced to sit through an assembly he hadn't planned. Polished, compact, his haircut sharp enough to part fog. He didn't look at Elena, which told her he was looking at her constantly. "Go on," Kruger said, gesturing to the floor. "Pick it up." Elena knelt. The concrete seeped through her pants with Arctic indifference. Up close, the damage was worse. Someone had slammed this blade against something harder than steel, rebar, a truck bed, a frozen axle, and done it on purpose. She ran a thumb across the spine. The steel was good stock once. It had memory. It had stubbornness. The hook could pull bark. The spine could strike flint. The bent tip would be worthless for thrusting, clumsy for fine work. Useless for those who wanted what tools were supposed to be. She slid the knife into the empty space on her belt, mirroring exactly where a perfect knife would have gone. She didn't look up to accept the insult. She didn't need what they were offering. Kruger's grin flattened. "All right," he barked, turning to the rest. "Listen up. 20 trainees, 18 men, 2 women." Snapped to a line that was almost straight. The hangar's chatter died as if snuffed. Kruger paced in front of them, boots knocking out the same cadence as the wind kept on the doors. "You were selected because someone thinks you're hard to break," he said. "The weather disagrees. In 24 hours, you'll be inserted out there." He jerked his chin at the gray rectangle of day beyond the doors. "You'll navigate to a series of points and an extraction zone 70 miles away. 70 miles of muskeg, scrub, and clean, honest cold. No resupply. No comms except emergency. You'll carry what's on the pallet and you'll carry it far. You'll live off what you can find. You'll work with the team we give you, not the team you wish you had." A few heads dipped. Proud smiles tightened like knots. "You will not die," Kruger added, flat. "We don't have the paperwork for that." A ripple of relieved laughter moved down the ranks. Colonel Walker didn't smile. "Sir?" One of the privates raised a hand with more gym confidence than field sense. "What about GPS?" "Will be issued," Kruger said. "Until it isn't. Compasses too. Until they're liars." You'll learn to read the land like it's written for you. He stopped before Elena without turning to face her. And you'll learn to make do. He had wanted a flinch when he tossed the knife. He'd expected a laugh, a protest, a crack in the quiet. What he'd gotten was nothing. The kind of nothing that made a room feel smaller. Walker finally spoke. His voice carried the burn of someone who preferred memos to weather. Warrant Officer Markova. Elena turned her head. Sir, your service record reads like a travel brochure for office buildings. Walker's tone was measured, bored. Pentagon liaison. Interagency liaison. Administrative liaison. A lot of liaison for someone who signed an army contract. Assignments as ordered, sir. You understand this isn't some executive retreat with lentils and leadership slogans. He gestured toward the map. We don't need a morale consultant. We need soldiers who can find north when all the needles are wrong. This course breaks men who have spent years in the field. Yes, sir. You requested, sir. No, sir. Walker blinked. Then why are you here? Elena's face didn't change. Someone else requested, sir. Kruger hid a smile in a scowl. Walker let the silence try to do work for him. Failed. Finally, he nodded to Kruger. Get them kit. Munitions crates thumped open. Gear appeared in a controlled avalanche. Tarps, ferro rods, steel cups, vacuum-packed rations like Gray Confidence, med kits, cordage, a bundle of laminated maps. Kruger's assistants moved down the line, dropping items with the grace of gravity. There were knives in the crate. Straight, honest knives, just not enough of them. Elena's spot had been timed for the bottom. She checked what she was given carefully, methodically, without rechecking. The motions made space between her and the line. Her fingers moved like she'd mapped each pocket and pouch before she'd ever seen them. When she coiled her cordage, she rubbed a bit of something waxy between her fingers and the fibers, bearing the sheen of beeswax. She worked it in from a tin the size of a quarter, then palmed the tin away. The others noticed everything about one another in quick, hungry glances. That was how young soldiers survived. By taking the measure, by sorting pecking orders before the wilderness did it for them. Elena let them see what she didn't mind them seeing. Neatness, certainty, quiet. She hid what mattered in plain sight. She drifted to the edge of the group, near the map board. No one assigned her there. No one invited her. She studied the drawn route. Insertion northeast of the Eagle River Valley, cut through spruce and muskeg, up a low ridge line, cross the South Fork, pick up a game trail, move west to the extraction grid on a bald hill like a scraped knuckle. The plan assumed weather like the past 10 years of climate charts. Plans did that. A skinny private with a peach fuzz mustache, name tape Jackson, struggled to cinch his ruck. He'd loaded water bladders on the outside where willow branches would rip them. He'd put his socks where he couldn't reach them fast if frost made a decision about his toes. Elena stepped to him without stepping into him. You're Jackson. He straightened. Yes, ma'am. You left the factory twist on your tourniquet. He flushed. Oh, take it off. If you need it, you'll need it now, not after some other soldier lies to you about how to use it. She said it with no heat, no teacher's pride. He fumbled the plastic off, stuffed it into a pocket, then looked at her ruck. Ma'am, is that beeswax? For cord, Elena said. Keeps it from drinking water. Makes knots remember. Oh, Jackson nodded like he'd been told where north was and had always hoped it was there. A murmur rose near the doors, which were shuddering against the wind as if the whole building had been set on a long exhale. An aircrew chief in a green flight suit stepped in, frost still white on his eyebrows. Birds are spun up. Window's not pretty, but it's there. He looked at Kruger. You want him up now. Kruger clapped once, the sound sharp enough to cut the hangar in half. Saddle up. Check your buddy's kit. Then check your kit like you hate it. Elena pulled her gloves, tugged them snug, and drew the bent knife. She wrapped a strip of cloth around the grip, not for comfort but for friction. Then she set the knife against the spine of a ferro rod and dragged just once, checking the bite. The spark shower was healthy, bright, willing. Kruger watched her without turning his head. He didn't like what the sight did to his expectations. They filed out in pairs, packs groaning, boots knocking the threshold. Outside, white sky, white ground, a palette of military grays in between. The wind had teeth. It sampled faces, found favorites, promised to be back for more. The hellos squatted on the pad like mean insects, rotors ticking into life. Fuel fumes braided with the clean sting of snow and pine sap. Somewhere a flag cracked like a rifle report. Colonel Walker paced them as they walked, saying nothing, his presence a bruise. At the steps to the bird, he touched Kruger's elbow. "Make an example," Walker said softly. Kruger's eyes flicked to Elena, then back to Walker. "Examples make themselves, sir." Walker's gaze held on Elena long enough to become an attempt at intimidation. She didn't return it. Eyes down, not submissive. Practical. She planted her boot on the skid, rode the rotor wash without fighting it, and took a seat in the back. Across from her, a corporal with surfer hair shoved under a beanie. Name tape, Ruiz, leaned in with a grin he thought would wear well under stress. "So, Warrant," he shouted over the rising wine. "You ever seen real snow, or is DC all cherry blossoms and cabs?" Elena looked past him at the open world beyond the tail ramp. "I've seen cold that doesn't ask permission." Ruiz's grin didn't know what to do with that. He let it stay. The bird lifted with a shudder, then steadied into its loud, vibrating calm. Fort Ravenwood shrank, then flattened, then vanished beneath the indifferent hand of distance. Sunlight smeared through a veil of fast, low cloud. The horizon had no corners. Kruger moved down the center, hand on the overhead rail, voice a bass thrum under the machine noise. "Remember your basics. Shelter, fire, water, navigation, food if time allows. Don't fight the weather, you don't have the lungs for it. Don't trust your tech if the land disagrees. Don't trust your eyes when the horizon tells lies." His gaze hooked Elena's just long enough for both to register that it had happened. "And make do," he finished. Elena nodded once, more to herself than to him. She closed her eyes and traced a mental list. Cordage, tarp, cup, ferro rod, maps, med knife. She let the list settle. She let the thrum of the rotors move through her bones like a metronome. She slowed her pulse under it the way a diver listens for depth. Ahead, the tundra spread in endless minor variations. Weak winter sun turned every drift into a dull blade. A storm band was knitting itself on the far horizon, picking up speed. They would be dropped into that. They would be told to make it to a point on a map that hadn't been drawn by anyone who'd bled on that ground. Most of them would try to overpower the land with will and muscle. Most of them would learn that the land didn't care. Elena reached down and checked the friction wrap on the broken knife. The steel didn't mind what anyone had wanted from it yesterday. It only minded what it could still do. When the crew chief gave the 2-minute sign, she opened her eyes. The wind knifed into the bay. Snow came in sideways, mean as gossip. Kruger shouted, "Masks up! Hands on kit!" Boots banged. Hearts tried to match the rotor and failed. Elena smiled, small and private, the way you might at a familiar street you hadn't walked in a long time. "Make it work," she said softly, to the knife, to the storm, to herself. Then the ramp dropped, and the cold rushed in like a command. The helicopter spat them out like seeds from a giant's hand. Rotor wash slammed the snow into horizontal knives. The ramp dropped, and suddenly they were not inside a machine but inside a storm. Boots sank ankle deep. Breath turned instantly to frost. The pilot didn't linger, no time, no mercy. The bird clawed itself back into the sky, rotors vanishing into the white, the sound fading to a memory swallowed by wind. Elena Markova hit the ground steady. Her knees flexed, absorbing the impact. She rose and scanned. 20 soldiers formed a ragged knot, backs hunched against the gale. Packs jerked and shifted like restless animals. Sergeant Kruger stomped to the front, shoulders squared against gusts that wanted everyone smaller. "This is it," he bellowed, voice dragging across the wind like gravel. 70 miles northeast, 2 days, extraction on high ground. Stay tight, Stay sharp, stay alive. The storm mocked him. His words scattered into the white. Some soldiers heard, some didn't, but all pretended they had. That was the soldiers' pact. Never admit what you didn't catch. Kruger waved his arm. Move out. They moved, at least their boots did. The rest of them lagged. Packs shifted badly packed loads. Straps bit shoulders raw. Goggles iced over from sweat and breath. One private, Murphy, cursed as his rifle sling cut his neck. Another, Chun, stumbled twice before finding rhythm. The line stretched and bent like an untrained spine. Elena took the rear not by order but by instinct. The rear was where you saw what was missed. You learned who had rhythm and who didn't, who leaned too hard, who carried their fear in their boots. She moved at her own metronome. Heel down, toe dig, breath through teeth, slow exhale. She let the storm set tempo, not fight it. The land was monochrome chaos. Spruce trees hunched like guilty men. Snow scoured their bark until black scars showed through. The ground alternated between hardpack crust and soft muskeg pits that swallowed boots whole. Wind knifed between them, carrying smells of pine resin and cold iron. After an hour, the first cracks showed. Private Jackson, the one she'd corrected about the tourniquet, wobbled under his load. His water bladders slapped against willow twigs, one already torn, leaking in a steady drip. He hadn't noticed. Elena filed it away. She would need him hydrated later, not half-drained and dizzy. Another recruit, Alvarez, kept adjusting his hat every few steps, hands bare against the freeze, fingers reddening. Frostbite was a clock that never reset. Elena said nothing yet. Information was most useful when timed. Ahead, Kruger trudged at the lead, compass raised like a holy relic. His jaw was tight. He trusted gear, and gear was failing. The storm smothered horizon lines. The compass needle jittered. The ground sloped subtly, leading them off course. He didn't notice or didn't want to. At the 2-hour mark, disaster brewed. Private Miller slipped on a rock glazed in hidden ice. His body folded wrong, like a puppet yanked by the wrong string. The crack echoed even through the storm. A scream tore the cold. "Medic!" Kruger roared. The medic dropped to his knees, hands shaking too badly to unzip his kit. Frost had numbed him to clumsiness. Miller writhed, his leg bent at an angle that made stomachs turn. Blood stained the snow in sharp red streaks. The team clustered, voices overlapping in panic. Kruger barked orders into the wind, fumbling with his dead radio, shouting for calm that refused to come. His authority was a blunt tool striking the wrong surface. Elena stepped forward. Calm, deliberate. She knelt beside Miller, eyes sharp, hands precise. "Hold him steady," she said. Not loud but cutting. The noise around her thinned. Soldiers obeyed without debate. They needed competence, and competence had arrived. She slid the bent knife free. Its hook caught bark cleanly from a nearby birch. Shavings piled in her glove. Pine needles from Chen's pack joined the mix. She had told him hours earlier to gather them, just in case. Now the case was here. She mashed bark and needles, creating a crude antiseptic poultice. The hook of the knife turned soft cambium into threads, pliable and useful. "Branches," she ordered. 2 men fetched them. She carved notches, the bent tip now perfect for the work. Her cord, already waterproofed with beeswax, bound splint to leg. Knots flowed from her fingers like second nature. Locking hitches, tension knots, fast, secure. Miller's scream dwindled to a groan as stability returned. The bleeding slowed. Shock lessened. 5 minutes. That was all it took. From chaos to order. From panic to plan. Elena sat back. "He'll live if we keep him warm. We need shelter. Now." Every face turned to her. Even Kruger's. His radio dangled, useless. His voice had cracked against the storm. Hers had cut through it. The group shifted as one. Soldiers who had been glancing at Kruger now looked to Elena. Authority had transferred without announcement, carried on the quiet certainty of skill. Kruger's eyes met hers. For the first time, his glare held not disdain, but the beginning of respect. and something colder, the realization that command had slipped from his grip. "Find a spot," he said, his voice tight, almost respectful. Elena didn't gloat. She scanned the terrain, spotted a cluster of spruce with snow-laden branches forming a natural barrier. She pointed. "There. Windbreak. Snow deep enough for insulation. Move." The soldiers lifted Miller onto a makeshift stretcher, following her lead without hesitation. Step by step, they trudged through storm and silence. The broken knife swung at Elena's hip, unbothered by its flaws. The storm thickened, erasing distance, erasing sound. But in that white void, the team had found a center, a pulse that did not quicken, a woman who had turned insult into weapon. They no longer marched for Kruger. They marched because Elena moved, and the tundra itself seemed to shift around her, like the storm had met something colder than itself. The storm swallowed them whole. Snow came sideways, dense enough to erase horizon and sky, a white cage with no edges. Every exhale froze in seconds. Boots punched down into crust, then sank into pockets of soft powder that dragged like hands. Miller moaned on the stretcher, his splinted legs stiff as stone. The team staggered, bent under packs and wind. Elena pushed forward, eyes scanning for what the storm had not stolen. Her mind ran like a compass that did not need north, just angles, slopes, shadows. She saw where snow piled deep against low spruces, branches bending into a dome under their own weight. Natural cover, natural insulation, shelter hidden in plain sight. "There," she said, voice calm but final. She pointed with her chin to the dark thicket. "Spruce copse. Windbreak." No one argued. The team angled toward it, dragging Miller carefully. Kruger trudged alongside, his jaw locked, saying nothing. He'd ceded the wordless command already, even if pride burned in his eyes. Inside the trees, the storm muffled. Branches creaked. Snow sloughed off in small avalanches. The group collapsed to their knees, panting. Frost clung to beards, lashes, collars. Fingers trembled. Boots squelched with melt. "Drop packs," Elena ordered. "We build a quinzy. Snow shelter. 2 hours work if we don't waste motion." "Build with what?" Ruiz asked, his surfer drawl edged by fear. "We don't have. We have snow." Elena cut him off. "And hands." She knelt, drove her gloves into powder, packing it down, piling it higher, shaping a mound. Everyone shovel, stomp, pack. Size of a car, taller than a man. Then it sets, then we hollow. The soldiers obeyed. Boots stamped, arms shoveled snow into a growing white dome. Breath roared in clouds. Jokes died quick in the cold, replaced by grunt rhythm. Miller was propped against a trunk, his breath shallow but steadier than before. Elena worked alongside them, not above. Her bent knife became a tool of snowcraft, hooking, scraping, cutting into hardening drifts. She moved with economy, no wasted gesture, showing by action what others should mimic. After an hour, sweat froze under layers, but the dome was tall enough. Elena stepped back, assessing angles. "Good. Now we wait. Let snow set. Half hour." "Wait," Alvarez muttered, teeth chattering. "We'll freeze." Elena turned to him. "Move while you wait. Small drills. Squats. Stomp feet. Keep blood alive. Shelter collapses if we dig too soon." She checked Miller. His face was pale, lips bluish. She knelt, tugged a tarp from her pack, wrapped it around him. "Heat is priority. He can't shiver. If he stops, he goes cold fast." The group nodded, the truth cutting deeper than the wind. When the snow hardened, Elena showed them how to carve. Bent knife first, scraping tunnels into the mound, then widening chambers. She taught them to keep walls thick, poke vent holes, build sleeping benches above the floor where cold air pooled. Inside, the world turned muffled, womb-like. The storm's roar reduced to whispers. Their breath filled space with human heat. But heat without fire was borrowed time. "We need flame," Elena said. Ruiz Chun fetch dead birch. Standing, not fallen. Peel the bark dry underneath. Quick. They scrambled out, returned with logs, their arms trembling. Elena drew her ferro rod and striker, crouched low. She used the knife's hook to strip bark, exposing the papery inner skin, fragile and dry. With the straight edge, she shaved curls into a nest, guarding them with her body against drafts. The soldiers watched, faces lit by the pale glow of headlamps. Her hands moved steady, unhurried. Sparks hissed when steel kissed ferro. Once, twice. On the third strike, the tinder glowed, then smoldered, then caught. A tongue of fire licked upward, fragile as glass. Elena breathed on it, patient, coaxing. She fed it curls, then twigs, then thin branches. The flame grew, trembling, alive. In minutes, a small fire crackled, snapping resin, throwing warmth into the quinzy's icy womb. The group exhaled as one. Relief was soundless, visible only in shoulders lowering, eyes thawing. Fire means life, Elena said softly. Keep it fed, but never greedy. Wood is ration like food. Kruger crouched opposite her, the firelight painting hard lines across his face. He stared at the bent knife in her hand, its hook now blackened with birch soot. For the first time, his expression carried no smugness, only the sharp recognition of competence beyond his own. Through the night, they rotated watch, feeding flame, melting snow for water in steel cups. Elena brewed willow bark tea, bitter but warming, pressing it to Miller's lips. His fever eased, sweat cooling his brow. The team ate rations sparingly, but the food mattered less than the fire. At one point, Private Jackson whispered, awe in his voice, "She saved us." With a busted knife. Nobody contradicted him. Even Kruger stayed silent. Outside, the storm raged, clawing at spruce, howling like a living thing denied prey. Inside the quinzy, 20 soldiers and one broken knife held against it. The night was long, but it belonged to them. Elena sat near the fire, her eyes steady, her pulse calm as ever. Around her, men who had snickered at her now watched with a different light in their eyes. Respect, reliance, the beginning of belief. She turned the knife in her hand, thumb brushing the bent steel. Not broken, different, an indifference possibility. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. She caught one thought and let it settle. Tomorrow would be harder. Rivers swelled under storms. Paths vanished. Extraction lay across challenges no map could show. But tonight, in the belly of snow and flame, they were alive. And that was the first victory. The storm broke by dawn, leaving the land draped in silence. White stretched to every horizon, sculpted into ridges and gullies by wind. The quinzy sagged but held, its walls glowing faint blue with daylight. The fire had died to ash. The soldiers crawled out one by one, their faces raw, their eyes ringed with exhaustion. The air was still, brittle cold that snapped in their lungs. But stillness did not mean safety. The storm had left scars. Creeks swelled, valleys drifted deep, the ground untrustworthy under its smooth disguise. They packed camp with stiff fingers, shouldering loads that seemed twice as heavy now. Miller was pale but awake, teeth clenched against pain. The splint Elena had tied still held. They lashed him to the stretcher again. He nodded once, silent gratitude, and bore his weight without sound. Hours passed. They moved northeast, following the land more than the compass, guided by sun's weak arc and the tilt of drifts. Elena's eyes never stopped moving. Shadows, tree lines, the way ravens circled far off. Each detail was a coordinate. By midday they reached it, a river swollen with meltwater from the storm. On the map it had been narrow, fordable. Reality was a churning wall of gray, twice as wide, 10 times as fast. The current ripped past with foam and broken ice. It roared like a thing alive, daring them to try. Kruger stood on the bank, fists on hips. "Standard procedure," he muttered. "We move upstream, find a crossing, or build a raft." "That's a day," Elena said. Her eyes tracked the far bank. Low trees, the ridge rising beyond. The extraction point lay only a march away, if they crossed. She scanned upstream. Nothing but more water. No narrows, no mercy. Miller doesn't have a day, she said simply. Kruger's jaw worked. He hated the truth in her voice. Then what? Swim. No, Elena said. She pointed. A spruce trunk, thick and sturdy, had fallen halfway across, jammed in the current. Its far branches clawed the opposite bank. Not a bridge, but an anchor. We build a Tyrolean, she said. Blank stares. Some had heard of it, most hadn't. Ropework from mountaineers, not infantry. A cable bridge. Dangerous. Precise. We don't have ropes, Ruiz protested. Elena dropped her pack. We make rope. For the next hour she set them to work. Bootlaces were stripped, pack straps cut, paracord gutted for its inner strands. She wove it all together, braiding with practiced speed, knots flowing from her hands like music. Square knots, double fishermen's, a rhythm of pull and tighten. The bent knife carved frays clean, its hook catching loose threads. Piece by piece, scraps became a line strong enough to bear weight. The soldiers watched, disbelief shifting to awe. When she finished, the rope coiled in her lap looked impossibly solid. A lifeline spun from desperation. Now came the throw. She tied a stone with a climber's knot, weighting the cord. She stepped to the riverbank, gauging wind, gauging distance. 20 eyes held their breath. She swung once, twice, released. The stone sailed in a perfect arc, line unfurling. Caught a branch on the far side, wrapped, held. A cheer went up, ragged but real. Elena tested the tension, then tied her end to the fallen spruce. She leaned back with her weight solid. I go first, she said. She looped the rope through her harness improvised from webbing, tied a safety hitch at her waist. Then she swung onto the line. The river bellowed below, spray hitting her face with icy claws. She pulled hand over hand, legs hooked, body angled. The current reached for her, but the line held. In less than a minute she touched the far bank, secured the rope high on a trunk, tied it off with a hitch that would not slip. She came back across with calm efficiency. The line sagged slightly, but it was ready. Pairs, she ordered. Gear first, then men, then Miller. Move. One by one, soldiers crossed, faces tight with fear, hands burning on frozen cord. Packs dangled, rifles slung. Some slipped, legs dipping, but the rope held. Elena moved among them, steadying, coaching, correcting knots. At last it was Miller's turn. They lashed him to the stretcher, clipped the line through loops. For soldiers pulled from the far side, for steadied from the near. Elena went with him, crawling alongside, hand always on his harness. The river screamed beneath them, a grave yawning wide, but Miller's stretcher slid across, inch by inch, until it touched the far snow. When Elena's boots hit the far bank last, the group collapsed in a heap, gasping, laughing with the ragged joy of survival. They had done what maps had not accounted for, what training had not prepared. They sat in the snow, staring at the rope still trembling above the torrent. Ruiz shook his head, voice hoarse. We should be dead. But we're not, Jackson whispered, eyes on Elena. Kruger looked at the bent knife at her belt, its steel scratched and worn from bark, ice, rope. In that crooked blade, he saw the truth. What was meant to break her had become the tool of their salvation. Elena stood, scanning the ridge ahead. The extraction point was close now. She adjusted her pack straps, nodded once. On your feet, she said. We finish this. No one hesitated. They followed, their boots finding rhythm behind hers. Their fear burned away by fire, rope, and a broken knife that had never stopped working. The helicopter rotors churned the air into a storm of their own, whipping snow into white spirals that clawed at the sky. The team trudged into the clearing, filthy, frozen, exhausted, but upright. Even Miller, strapped to a stretcher, lifted his head as the bird settled. 2 days in the tundra had aged them years, but they were alive. More than alive, they had finished 6 hours ahead of schedule. They climbed aboard, collapsing into seats with the silence of people who had nothing left to give. The vibration of the rotors hummed through their bones. For once, no one cracked a joke. No one jostled for space. They sat still, gazes drifting toward Elena, the quiet figure buckling Miller's harness before her own. Kruger sat opposite her, helmet dangling from his hand, eyes lowered. He hadn't spoken since the river. Every time his gaze touched the bent knife on her belt, his throat worked as if swallowing words too large to pass. The flight back was wordless. Snowfields slipped beneath them, ridges like white scars. Fort Ravenwood emerged from the horizon, towers, antennas, rectangles of metal buildings arranged in military geometry. The bird descended, skids kissing the pad with a jolt. They disembarked into the brittle air. Soldiers staggered toward the hangar where the exercise had begun. Colonel Walker was waiting, arms folded, jaw set. His polished boots shone against ice. Behind him stood staff officers with clipboards, expressions caught between curiosity and disbelief. "Report," Walker said, voice cold. His eyes flicked over their ragged formation and stopped on Elena, the same way a man notices a stain he cannot scrub. Kruger cleared his throat. His voice rasped, raw from storm and shame. "Sir, team inserted into AO. Encountered storm surge, navigation systems down, radios dead. Private Miller injured, compound fracture. Survival situation, no support." He paused, swallowing. "We improvised shelter, fire, medic, rope crossing." Walker's brows drew tight. "And the outcome?" Kruger's shoulders lifted, fell. "Extraction point reached. 6 hours early. Entire team accounted for." His gaze dropped, then lifted, steady but humble. "Credit belongs to Warrant Officer Markova. She led us. She saved us." The silence in the hangar thickened. Walker stared, lips thinning, disbelief a mask over fury. "She?" His tone was ice. "A liaison officer? With a damaged knife." The hangar doors banged open. Wind pushed in a tall figure, broad-shouldered, uniform immaculate despite the storm. His stripes and insignia glittered like metals carved in stone. The man carried an aura that pulled attention like gravity. "Sergeant Major Vance," someone whispered. The name rippled down the ranks like a current. Command Sergeant Major of the entire Alaskan sector. A legend, rarely seen on forward bases. Vance's eyes swept the room. They caught on Elena, and stopped. His stride faltered. Recognition flared across his weathered face. He stepped past Walker without a word. The colonel bristled, ignored. "My God!" Vance breathed. His voice, usually thunder, dropped to reverence. "Raven." The word dropped into the hangar like a stone into still water. Soldiers stiffened. Even Kruger's jaw went slack. Walker's eyes narrowed. "What did you call her?" "Raven," Vance said, louder now. He turned to the stunned colonel. "Do you have any idea who you threw into that storm with a broken knife?" His gaze swung back to Elena, and respect sharpened every syllable. 20 years ago, Chechnya. My unit was surrounded, wounded, cut off. No comms. We were dead men, until she came. 3 days she hunted the hunters. 12 of us walked out alive. She carried nothing but a piece of shrapnel for the last day. That's who she is. The hangar air froze thicker than the tundra outside. Walker's face blanched, the smug polish stripped raw. Files, redactions, rumors, all snapping into place. He had called her a desk jockey. He had tried to break a ghost no one dared name. Every soldier in the formation turned toward Elena. The awe was open now, unhidden. They had thought her a transfer, an outsider, maybe a burden. Instead, they had marched behind a legend. Private Jackson was first. He snapped to attention, hand shooting to his brow in salute sharper than any he had given in his life. Chin followed, then Ruiz, then the rest. Even Kruger raised his hand, his salute heavy with apology. The sound of boots stamping echoed through the hangar like thunder. Elena walked past them, her footsteps crisp, her expression unchanged. She did not return the salute, but her eyes moved once across the line, acknowledging. That was enough. Respect did not need ceremony. Walker cleared his throat, but the sound was brittle, breaking. He started, "Warrant officer," then faltered. Orders sounded hollow against competence that had already judged him. He stood there, authority stripped not by rebellion, but by relevance lost. Elena did not stop for him. She crossed the hangar and stepped into the barracks wing, leaving silence in her wake. That night the base was quiet. Machinery hummed low. Snow fell soft against windows. Elena sat alone on the edge of her bunk. The bent knife lay across her palms. She turned it slowly, thumb brushing scratches carved by bark, rope, ice, fire. Every scar was memory. A splint, a quinsy, a rope bridge, a river crossed. She drew a whetstone from her kit, not to hammer the blade straight. The bend was part of it now, part of her. Instead, she honed the edges as they were, sharpening the curve into a hook that gleamed. Steel sang against stone, a rhythm steady as her pulse. Outside, the Alaskan wilderness slept under new snow. Stars burned cold, unbothered by storms. Inside, Elena set the sharpened knife on the nightstand, its bent tip pointing toward the window, toward the endless white. It was no longer broken. It was transformed. A symbol, a tool, a reminder. They had handed her a flaw, and she had carved survival from it. They had handed her a broken knife. She had led the team to the finish ahead of time. In the end, what began as an insult became a legend retold. They handed her a broken knife, bent and useless, and thought it would break her. But in her hands, that flaw became strength. She carved medicine. She carved shelter. She carved a bridge over a raging river. And most of all, she carved belief into the hearts of everyone who followed her. She didn't prove herself with speeches or pride. She proved herself with silence, with skill, with the calm heartbeat of someone who had faced storms far worse and walked out alive. That bent knife was more than steel. It was the symbol of resilience, of adaptation, of the quiet power of a leader who never asked for respect but earned it in every breath. Elena Raven Markova walked into the snow as a stranger. She returned as the reason 20 soldiers lived. And when the world saw her as broken, she sharpened herself against the stone of adversity until she gleamed. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more tales of survival, resilience, and the quiet legends hidden in plain sight. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded. Sometimes the flaw is the weapon, and sometimes the broken blade is the sharpest edge of all. Because stories like this aren't just meant to be heard once. They're meant to stay with you, to sharpen you just like that bent knife.